Welcome back to EDIT 640. It's Joe again, here to present this week's module on compositing for instructional video productions. In this lesson, we'll briefly review the CRAP visual design principles as they apply to video production. Then we'll take a look at 4 fundamental compositing options available to editors: titles, split screens, color keys, and motion effects. I suppose it would make sense to start with the definition first, so let's try this. Compositing happens when you combine elements on multiple visual tracks in the timeline, all of which create the illusion of it being a single image. You can composite video and title text elements, video and graphic elements, and even video and video elements, and we'll have examples of each. But first, let's review those CRAP principles from EDIT 604. You remember these, do you not? This was the fantastic basic visual design model proposed by Robin Williams in her now famous book in its 3rd edition, talking about how we can take contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity principles and apply them to any visual document, including video. And we'll talk about these principles as they apply to a variety of different types of productions. But to begin with, let's take a look at one example here that uses each of these in a very subtle way. In this clip, you're going to see an example of a new bicycle tire technology, and although that might be interesting to you, I want you to pay attention and look for how text titles are used on screen, and then how the graphics are repeated in various places. And look how they're aligned, always consistently. And finally, check the proximity of the different elements as they appear on screen. We'll watch it for just a few seconds.
The bicycle wheel with spokes has been the way it is.
Okay, now the guy has kind of an annoying voice, I get it, but take a look at the text that animates into the screen from the right to the left. Richard Quest from London. This is very, very typical. You identify your speaker, tell them who they are, or tell the audience who they are, and then where they're from, if that's relevant, or sometimes their credentials, what their position is. We see that with a lot of expert interviews. This CNN logo over on the right-hand side here, that's called a bug. It's kind of an industry term, but if you used logo, that would be acceptable as well.
That is, till now. This is the loop wheel, which, if the inventor has his way, will overturn centuries of cycling. Why does this work better?
This works better because we've got rid of the...
Okay, so here we have a spontaneous interview. Well, it's probably not too spontaneous, really. I'm sure it's staged, but the point is you have another subject on screen in this 2-shot here who's doing the speaking, and then you have the text come out to identify who that person is. And all I simply want you to see here is that that particular text animation happens in the exact same place, using the exact same font and the exact same colored background. That consistency is repetition. The contrast, the dark color of the black background and the white color of the text creates sufficient contrast so that we can actually see it visibly and distinguish it from the rest of the content in the background. It's aligned all the way to the right-hand side, flush right, and notice that it stays near the bottom. It's near the bottom so that we can see the speakers on screen. All of these are deliberate implementations of CRAP principles, whether the producer knew they were CRAP principles or not. They are. And the point that you simply need to remember in your own productions is that each one of these can be used even when it's very subtle, but it will make your productions much more professional. Now, I know you want to watch the rest of this video, but let's move on. There are 4 major categories of titling used in instructional productions typically: opening, segment, lower thirds, and of course end credits. But they each have one thing in common: carefully selected typefaces that use either a serif font with no tag ends or a sans serif font. Historically, a common practice dictated using serif fonts for printing and sans serif fonts for electronic viewing because serif fonts were considered more attractive, but they didn't display well on computer screens. All of that has changed, of course, recently with higher definition screen technologies giving producers many more options for their projects. If you don't believe me, just Google video typeface sometime to see a vibrant online marketplace where you can spend hours and hours shopping for that perfect font for your production. Opening title sequences can be simple, or they can be more time-consuming than the entire project. Just depends, especially if they involve text, graphic, and video elements that are animated, and we'll take a look at motion effects later on. Overlay titles are exactly what they sound like. They're text or shapes that are layered on top of a background video, and they're timed accordingly with whatever the content is for a specific purpose. And very few producers do this as well as Sesame Street. So let's watch a little bit longer example here, and I want to show you a couple things that they do extremely well in this production.
Welcome everyone to Make It Fit, the show where contestants can win big prizes if they can take a shape and make it fit. Now, let's meet today's contestant. He's a monster who likes to eat cookies in his spare time. Meet Mr. Cookie Monster of Sesame Street. Are you ready to play Make It Fit, Cookie Monster?
Oh, well, that depends, guy.
That depend on what? That depends on what?
A big prize is cookie, right?
Cookie Monster, we won't know until the game is over. But I can tell you that just last week...
Okay, and so it goes on and on there. You understand what the process is. He has to put this the shape into a pre-sized hole. And let me show you here what happens when he actually gets to that point.
Yes, an octagon! A shape with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 sides.
Okay, so we had a simple trace there of the actual shape. That's a composite. And then you had a text title layered on top of that. That's just the number 8. Very simple, but very effective and very important for the kind of instructional content and for the learner level that we're talking about. We'll see it used again here in just a minute when Cookie Monster gets it wrong. Watch what happens.
All of them the same length. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 angles. Are you ready?
Me ready!
You've got 60 seconds. Go!
Oh, that nice clock.
Get the clock is ticking.
Oh, yeah. Okay, octagon. Oh, boy.
8 sides, Cookie Monster.
Yeah.
All the same length.
Right, all the same length. 8 sides. Oh, octagon. Oh, hiya, hiya, hoa, hiya, he.
Better count those sides, Cookie.
Oh, 1, 2, 3. 3 sides.
3.
Okay, once again, same technique is used for a very, very effective purpose. Let's move on to lower thirds. Lower thirds are very commonly used in instructional productions, especially when you have guest speakers, expert interviews, interviews of subjects on the street, or anytime somebody's talking on camera. Just like in that bike tire example that we saw previously, on CNN, we had the lower third slide out. It's called a lower third, obviously, because that's its positioning on the page. And the most important thing you need to remember about this is to position them and color them and style them and design them consistently. If you use a particular font and a particular color background, make sure you repeat that everywhere else you use these, as we discussed in that previous example. You'll note also that typically lower thirds have 2 lines of text. One is to identify the person, and the second is to describe something about them, typically either a place or their occupation or their credentials, etc. Anything that's relevant to the audience and the particular production. Of course, we all know what end credits are. We've seen them in every Hollywood production, but one thing I will say is that for instructional productions, they're certainly nowhere near as elaborate because you as the producer are generally wearing so many different hats, sometimes all of the different hats. And so your list of crews and your list of participants are much smaller than what you would find in professional productions and Hollywood productions. But nevertheless, the principle is the same. Declare the person and their position so that they can get credit for the work that they did in your production. Typically these scroll in or they dissolve in or flash in. Sometimes they're done with outtakes, and sometimes they're done with a split screen and other content on the right hand side. Typically we usually put the credits on the left hand side. All of that is at your creative discretion. Speaking of split screen, we see split screen effects occasionally used by compositors in instructional productions, especially those that are shot in multicam. For example, we see this a lot in music instruction videos, particularly those for guitar lessons. We see this a ton, where you have 3 different cameras, in this case, shooting the exact same sequence in the exact same real time, but they each have a different type of shot. In the main shot, you get to see the strumming with the right hand. In the top shot, you get to see the finger positioning on the fretboard. And then in the bottom shot, you can see it even better in a zoom shot. So split screening really is a misnomer, because you're not splitting the screen in half. You can split the screen up into as many frames as you can squeeze in there. What's really happening here is very simple. You're just taking 3 different shots and you're stacking them on top of each other. Now, I'm assuming that they're synced. You used a clapboard, or you clapped your hands and you lined up the waveforms so that they're synchronized. And once they're synchronized and stacked up on top of each other, then in the preview window, you simply resize and position them according to how you want them to be seen by the viewer. Now, historically speaking, before the internet took over as this incredible medium for video distribution, split screens went against a lot of the research on cognition, because it was distracting for learners to have to watch 3 different screens at the same time. But what we're starting to see is that learners want to be able to review this, and they're very proficient at clicking the pause button, rewinding, watching it again, because you don't have to wait for tapes anymore. Obviously, you just drag the little slider, play it again, or use the keyboard to back it up and keep playing it as many times as you want, allowing you the luxury of rehearsing it and watching a different frame within a frame each time. Color keying, of course, is the art of extracting a subject or element out of its background and placing them in a different one. Green screen, of course, is one of the most popular examples of color keying. We're used to seeing this on the Weather Channel, of course. And it works simply by having a literal green screen behind your subjects, which then allows you to remove them from that background and put any other kind of background underneath them. You also see it with backdrop props. In this case, we've got a television behind the newscaster on the right-hand side, but that newscaster, I can assure you, is sitting in front of a fake prop and not a real TV. That's just a green screen color TV, and we're seeing it after the composite has already been performed. And the process works exactly the same as split screen. You stack and synchronize your clips, and then you can assign, in this case, the green screen or the color key or the chroma key effect, depending on which tool you're using, and the extraction will take place magically. And again, please note that the background video does not have to match the exact dimensions of the subject video if you have some type of containing prop like this fake TV. And that way you can create the illusion that there is a live TV playing in the background. And truth be told, the newest generation of TVs are so good, you really don't even need to use this green screen prop technology process anymore, but it can be very effective nonetheless. Motion effects are in many ways an editor's most creative tool for compositing, because literally any element on screen can be assigned movement, including titles, graphics, and either other video clips. We'll take a look at examples of each of these. Take a look at this first example from a PBS documentary on the show Nova. Okay, that's it. Very, very quick. Let's watch it one more time. Wow, a lot going on there. One more time, let's do it frame by frame here. See if I can get my cursor to behave. Okay, let's watch these come in bit by bit here. We have some text animating in. We have 2 different text objects. We've got this phrase that's being spelled out here, and then we have another word that's coming in at the same time. These are 2 totally separate objects with 2 different animation effects applied to them very effectively. So let me press play again. Okay, and then we have a third one that comes in, smart. So we've got 3 objects that animate in very, very quickly. And then we have that rocket getting ready to take off. Okay, that's a shape, and it has a path motion assigned to it, and it blasts off. And of course, we end up with the logo there. Now, if you watched it carefully, you also noticed that we zoomed in. And that was a little bit trickier to see. So there are a lot of stuff happening in just a short segment there. And this is obviously professionally produced, but it is something that Premiere Elements is capable of handling. You just have to pick the right typeface and assign the correct motion effect. And there are tutorials on how to do stuff like this elsewhere in the course in this module. Here's another example that doesn't use as much text and relies instead more on traditional graphic animation. And as you'll see, it's very short, but very, very complex in design.
Why do we have to sleep? I am losing valuable life hours here.
Okay, and that's it. Again, one more time. Okay, so lots of different lines that are being drawn here and objects that are rotating in and spinning out. We don't have a whole lot of text. We've got the word news, of course, but everything, and the letter D, of course, but everything else is a collection of shapes. And this type of production was actually made in a professional titling application. It's not something that Premiere Elements is going to be able to handle well at all. Vector-based animation is not a function that Premiere Elements can perform capably. For that, you'll need a more professional product. And of course, that's beyond the scope of this class, but nonetheless, it's still worth pointing out for the sake of contrast. What's the lesson? Well, if you're going to use motion effects, use them in Premiere Elements with titles or static graphics. You won't be able to generate animations like this unless you get stock footage and then import it into the timeline. The same can be said for motion video. Applying video clips with these special motion effects can get very, very cumbersome. And I want to play a title sequence here from a show that we all know very well, The Deadliest Catch. And I want you to see just how subtle this is. So let's watch a little bit of it, and then I'm going to skip ahead.
Just hours after the Oquilio fleet departed.
Okay, the show begins very formulaic. You know that. The narrator kind of sets the setting and situates the viewer, and then eventually we see something dramatic, and then we finally get the opening sequence. And you find this very common in a lot of Hollywood productions. Okay, and I'm going to skip ahead now to the opening title sequence, and this is obviously much more dramatic than anything you'd probably ever do in an instructional video. But the technique that it displays here is really, really cool, and I'll pause it when we get to it.
As two Arctic hurricanes threaten the fleet, the routine rescue mission has turned into a flight for survival as the hunt continues for the deadliest catch.
Okay, so far, this is just a montage sequence of dramatic weather moments from the footage captured on the boat. But watch what happens coming up here in a bit. Okay, we still have montage, but here it comes. Okay, right there. Did you see this guy, Keith, animate in from the left? On the right-hand side, you have another totally separate shot. And he's been color keyed out, Keith has, and his video, which is just of his body right now, and his face, of course, is layered on top of the background video of the other guys. And he slides in. So you have my point is you have two different clips here. One acting as the backdrop, the other is the foreground, and this foreground clip simply has a motion effect applied to it. Now there's obviously a little bit more going on in the background as well. You've got some alpha channels, which simply means transparency channels. You got the seagull flying in the background and the clouds, etc. There are 3 or 4 layers here of stuff. But the key layers that are relevant to what I want to talk about are the motion effects, are his video and the video of the other crew members. We'll see it again. Watch this. Okay, they did the same thing. 2 different clips here. That's not the same clip. 2 totally different clips, just a much more subtle animation. Okay, we did it again there. That's Sig coming in, who's become a ridiculous celebrity for this particular show. Talk about how much his life has changed. Good grief. Maybe I'm a little envious there. I don't know. Nevertheless, the 2 different clips there are being merged to create this illusion, and it works very, very well. And yes, it is very complex, very tedious, but again, a totally different scope of budget, but worth pointing out. So that's going to conclude this lesson on compositing for instructional video. The takeaway lessons, of course, are to keep things simple in instructional productions. But go ahead and please view the remaining videos in this module for more details on this creative and yet time-consuming production process. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.